if you've ever done any of that, or if you have ever done any kind of training that involves a speed bag, especially if it's attached to the floor, and if you've ever hit a punching bag, you have Canadian boxer George Dixon to thank. George Dixon was a very important figure to the boxing community, and he happened to have been born in Africville, Nova Scotia in 1870. Now, unfortunately, his life ends rather tragically, but I want to actually celebrate how much this, tiny featherweight black Canadian influenced the sport of boxing and just regular fitness regimes to this day. So what happens with George Dixon is that he's born in Africville, and later on as a kid, he moves with his family to Boston. While they're in Boston, he ends up deciding to pursue an interest in photography as a teenager. And this introduces him to the sport of boxing in general, because a lot of his earliest photos and work as an apprentice was taking promotional pictures of boxers, when they're like, that's how he got his start and first got his interest. Now, with that in mind, Dixon, whose nickname in the ring was Little Chocolate, was a tiny man. He was 5'3", and at the time of his first bantamweight championship, weighed only 87 pounds. But the man was described as, very scientific in boxing and training, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But in terms of what he did that's worth mentioning, he was the first boxer to win championships in multiple weight classes, principally bantamweight and featherweight. Now, on top of that, he was just like, he blew onto the scene in his first match, which was in 1886, and he won his fight by way of knockout. I don't know what round it was, but that's still pretty impressive for your first fight. That's a way to get started and get noticed. So let's actually just take a look at some of his career highlights. So in 1888, he won what he believed was the World Bantamweight Championship title in Boston, but because of the lack of organizational structure at this point in time, there was someone else over in England by the name of Nunk Wallace who claimed to also be the world champion. So to sort of hype up promos and get some attention, they decided to have a fight for the title of world championship. And so in 1890, Dixon and his manager, Tom O'Rourke, actually traveled to England to settle the dispute, and Dixon defeated Wallace via knockout in 18 rounds to finally be recognized as the world champion. This is how he became the first, not only black fighter to be crowned world champion in boxing history, it also may have made him the first black athlete to win a championship in any sport. So that's another reason why he's actually very important and should be known about more outside of both the boxing community and the Black Nova Scotian community. This also makes him, I think, the first Canadian to win a world championship of any weight class. So there's also that. After that, he defended his bantamweight title, and he also went on to just kind of dominate the scene. So then he actually added some poundage so that he could then participate in the featherweight class. And after doing that, he actually captured the featherweight championship in 1891, which made him the first person to capture world titles in two weight classes. So already this man is clearly a very capable, light on his feet, knows what he's doing, capable boxer. Now, his nickname first really originates in 1896 in print. We are not sure how early that actually happened, but that's when it's definitely confirmed. And according to the International Boxing Hall of Fame, Dixon retired with a career record of 50 victories, 44 draws, 26 losses, and 7 with no decision. And one of those draws was like the world's longest boxing match. It was over 4 hours long. It was absolutely ridiculous. Now, later on, of course, as a dominant fighter and married to a white woman, he was regularly subjected to fierce racism, especially in, at this point, Reconstruction era and post-Civil War United States. In 1892, he actually knocked out a white amateur champion in the 8th round, and fearing, potential resulting riots, they banned all mixed race fights after this, which didn't really help black athletes in the sport. And a year later, in 1893, he published a lesson on boxing, and this is where he detailed a lot of his techniques that he used, because a lot of people were saying, how have you developed just this crazy stamina? How is it you just seem to always know what you're doing? And this is where he explains a lot of his techniques, which are still used to this day. He talked about how he would imagine fighting with an opponent, so he would block, jab again, duck. Shadow boxing is his invention. And the idea of, practicing with the gloves with added weights so that he could improve his quickness when the weights came off. Holding a heavy bag filled with, grain or sand from the ceiling and hitting it to, simulate the weight of hitting a dense body. Like that was practice, and for refining technique and building up bone and muscle density. Attaching the speed bag to the floor to improve footwork while boxing, and a lot of what boxers continue to do. And the stuff we see in Rocky, right? We think, oh yeah, Rocky, yeah, look at what he's doing. Yeah, it's great, but all that stuff was invented by this black Nova Scotian who moved to Boston and became, for his time, one of the most well-known and celebrated boxers, winning multiple world championships, defending his title, and in multiple weight classes. The man should absolutely be a legend, especially considering how his life ended. While at the time, over his career, he was said to have earned over, $250,000, which again, in those days, is a lot of money. After retiring, he just became really lost in alcoholism. He retired in 1906 and he died in 1908 in the alcoholism ward of a hospital in New York City. Some, choose to rank him as the #1 bantamweight fighter of all time. In 2017, Nova Scotia Sports Hall of Fame ranked him number 6 in, their sort of all-time greatest sports legends. And the George Dixon Community Center in Halifax is named in his honor. And while these are all good things, it clearly shows that he's really only being celebrated and honored in Nova Scotia, which, as a black Nova Scotian, it makes sense. But you would think that after everything that I've told you about here, that he would be celebrated not just in Canada or America because of his, many years doing his career in Boston and New York City. You would think that this man would also be seen as just a hero to the boxing community and a name that is on the lips of everyone who enjoys the sport. And the fact that he isn't is definitely what's bothering me today.